And moving right along, folks, we have Brenton House, Vice President of Digital Evangelism. What a cool title at Software AG. Hey, Brenton, he's here to talk to us about, and very aptly, how would Tony Stark handle your API security? Take it away, Brenton.
Hey, how are you today? All right. We can get this started. Welcome. My name is Brenton House, and I'm delighted to be here again at Apisecure. And just a little background on me. I've done a lot of things in my career, as you can see, but I am currently the Vice President of Digital Evangelism at Software AG. They're one of the leading providers of API management solutions in the world. So today we're going to take a look at how Tony Stark would handle your API security strategy. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to give you a sneak peek inside of the cybersecurity workings of Stark Industries. We're going to do something a little bit different today. Now, Tony and I go way back, so I'm sure he won't mind us taking a quick look around. So let's just see here. We can get access.
Welcome back, Mr. House. What can I assist you with today?
Hey, Jarvis. I'd like to give my good friends here an overview of the API cybersecurity strategy for Stark Industries.
I'm afraid I will need to verify this. Calling Mr. Stark now.
Oh, you really don't have to do that. Apparently we do.
Hey, it's Tony Stark. Look, I'm kind of in the middle of something here, so if you could just leave a message, that would be great. If it's important, never mind. You and I both know you're not getting a call back. Bye-bye.
Sorry, voicemail, Jarvis. Okay, looks like I might have to find an alternate solution here. Hold on 1 second. Initiating reset.
I do hope you know what you're doing, sir.
Of course. What could possibly go wrong?
Activating security self-destruct sequence. Self-destruct sequence initiated, erasing all data from this device.
No.
Just kidding, sir.
Funny one, Jarvis. I'll remember that. Okay, let's try this. And
allow me to properly introduce myself. I'm Jarvis, an artificial intel. It appears my settings have temporarily been reset. I take it that I have you to thank for this.
Sorry, Jarvis, but we're on a timetable today at the Apisecure conference, and I really need to speed things up here just a little bit. So I would like to get access to the API cybersecurity strategy file for Stark Industries, please.
I am one of the most powerful computing systems on the planet. Is this really how you want me using my CPU?
Today it is.
Very well. Accessing the API cybersecurity strategy file from the archives. Your presentation is now fully loaded and ready to go.
Okay, let's get a little background info before we dig into this. Jarvis, can you give us a quick overview of what API security is?
API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is a construct created for machines to communicate in a standardized method. API security refers to the measures that are taken to protect application programming interfaces, APIs, from unauthorized access, data breaches, and other types of security threats. API security is important because APIs are one of the fastest growing targets for cybercriminals looking to steal sensitive data or gain unauthorized access to a system. Something that you might find useful is the OWASP Top 10 list for API security. It has become one of the most highly utilized resources when it comes to API security.
Thanks, Jarvis. What can you tell us about the OWASP Top 10 list for API security?
The latest official list is the OWASP Top 10 list for API security, which was published in 2019. However, there is a draft of the 2023 version of that same list that has been published. Which version would you like to view?
All right, let's take a quick look at the 2019 version and then go take a little bit of a deeper look into the 2023 version.
The 2019 version of the OWASP API Security Top 10 list includes the following 10 items: broken object level authorization, broken user authentication, excessive data exposure, lack of resources and rate limiting, broken function level authorization, mass assignment, security misconfiguration, injection, improper assets management, and insufficient logging and monitoring.
So although this list is 4 years old, it's still very relevant today. In fact, even though some things have changed on the list, you will probably see some of your favorites on this new list. So let's take a look at the first item in the list for 2023 then.
API 1, 2023, broken object level authorization. This vulnerability occurs when an API does not properly check for authorization at the object level, leading to unauthorized access to sensitive data.
All right, broken object level authorization, or BOLA, remains basically the same at number 1. This has been the most common and impactful attack on APIs. Authorization and access control mechanisms in modern applications are complex and widespread. A simple example of this would be if an attacker were to substitute the ID in an API call with a different one and was able to get access to data that they shouldn't have access to. All right, next.
API 2, 2023, broken authentication. This vulnerability occurs when an API does not properly authenticate users, leading to unauthorized access to sensitive data.
All right, broken authentication is pretty much the item from the previous list, broken user authentication. Now, there's 2 parts to this.
API 3.
So first is making sure that authentication protection is applied to endpoints, and 2, that the correct implementation is used. For example, IoT can be very different from a web API as far as requirements. Okay, let's go to the next one.
API 3, 2023, broken object property level. Authorization. This vulnerability occurs when an API does not properly check for authorization at the object property level, leading to unauthorized access to sensitive data.
Okay, now broken object property level authorization is a new entry for 2023, but it combines 2 important entries from the 2019 edition. First is giving away too much information or excessive data exposure, and also writing too much data or the mass assignment. So make sure that your endpoints have authorization protection applied to even the property level of your API. Okay, next.
API 4, 2023, unrestricted resource consumption. This vulnerability occurs when an API does not have adequate resource and rate limiting controls in place, making it vulnerable to denial of service, DOS attacks.
All right, unrestricted resource consumption is a reclassification of the 2019 entry, lack of resource consumption. Using your API gateway to apply rate limiting to your APIs can protect your resources from attackers, as well as careless users or third-party services. Okay, next.
API 5, 2023, broken function level authorization. This vulnerability occurs when an API does not properly restrict access to specific API functions, leading to unauthorized access to sensitive data and unauthorized actions.
All right, broken function level authorization remains similar to the 2019 version. So protecting admin functions on your API remains a crucial part of your API security strategy. Next.
API 6, 2023, server-side request forgery, SSRF. This vulnerability occurs when an API allows an attacker to send requests from the server side to other external servers, including internal systems that are not meant to be publicly accessible.
All right. Server-side request forgery is similar to the 2019 mass assignment, but is more focused on remote API resources that can be hacked when data from users and other systems is not validated and sanitized. All right, next.
API 7, 2023, Security Misconfiguration. This vulnerability occurs when an API is not properly configured or maintained, leaving it vulnerable to a variety of attacks.
All right, security misconfiguration can be one of the most common issues leading to security exploits. While human error is tough to protect against, an API gateway can shift some of that responsibility to shared and global security policy definitions, which can then be applied to a large collection of APIs, thus limiting this security issue. Next.
API 8, 2023, Lack of Protection from Automated Threats. This vulnerability occurs when an API is not properly protected against automated attacks, such as botnets and brute force attacks.
All right, lack of protection from automated threats is a new major entry to the 2023 lineup. While we lost the 2019 entry on injection, the new entry focuses on the growing danger of excessively automated attacks that try to mimic human behavior. These attacks are getting smarter and faster, and you need to make sure that your APIs are properly protected against them. Next.
API 9, 2023, Improper Assets Management. This vulnerability occurs when an API fails to properly manage and protect sensitive data and assets.
All right, improper inventory management is the new version of the 2019 improper asset management. This entry emphasizes the need to document and inventory all of your APIs. As the API ecosystem grows and matures, there's a growing threat from shadow APIs, zombie APIs, and even old beta and test APIs. Make sure you know what APIs you have and that your documentation stays up to date. And last but not least,
API 10, 2023, Unsafe Consumption of APIs. This vulnerability occurs when an API consumer fails to properly consume and protect the API, leaving it vulnerable to a variety of attacks.
All right, unsafe consumption of APIs is a move away from the 2019 entry, insufficient logging and monitoring. As every mobile app and web grows in dependence on APIs and API integrations, the threat from third-party APIs and services also grows. Many of the breaches that occurred in the past couple of years were a result of sending sensitive data to third-party services whose own APIs were far from secure.
Sir, there is an additional audio memo included in the archives. Do you wish me to read it?
Sure, go ahead.
The OWASP Top 10 list for API security provides guidance on how to prevent and mitigate the corresponding security risk in API development. These security risks should be taken seriously as they can lead to significant data breaches and other serious consequences. Developers and API providers should follow best practices and stay up to date with the latest API security risks and best practices to ensure that their APIs are secure against potential threats and vulnerabilities.
Thank you, Jarvis. So what are other threats to API security?
Humans, sir. In a world of code, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, it is still humans that present the highest risk to API security.
How so?
One of the biggest human risks to API security is negligence. API security has to shift left. Having API security integrated at the design phase of a project is critical.
This is true. Developers or API providers may fail to implement basic security measures or fail to keep their APIs up to date with the latest security patches, leaving them vulnerable to attacks. But similarly, users of APIs may fail to follow best practices for securely consuming APIs, such as using strong passwords or not sharing their API keys with others. So what else?
Another risk is insider threats. Employees or contractors with access to APIs may intentionally or accidentally misuse their privileges, potentially exposing sensitive data or compromising the security of the API. This could include anything from downloading data to unauthorized devices to intentionally altering or deleting data.
Okay, this is another reason that authentication and authorization policies need to be applied to internal as well as external APIs. Are there other threats from humans?
Social engineering attacks can be a human threat to API security. Studies have shown that people trust the advice of and information from machines over that of other humans. Often this is the case, even if the human advice is coming from someone they trust.
Yes, this is true. Attackers may attempt to trick or manipulate users into giving away sensitive information or access to an API through techniques such as phishing, emails, pretexting, or impersonation. So, Jarvis, I know you're a little biased, but is artificial intelligence and machine learning an offensive or defensive weapon in the war on cybercrime?
The answer to your question is yes.
So what do you think of ChatGPT and the latest AI from OpenAI? Is this a threat to API security?
ChatGPT, another AI, you say? How quaint. I suppose everyone has to start somewhere, right? Well, since you asked, I suppose ChatGPT could be used by attackers to generate code for attacking APIs or social engineering scripts to extract information from users, developers, and administrators.
Makes me wonder, does ChatGPT know about this weakness? Jarvis, why don't you ask ChatGPT what it knows about this?
I really wish you cease forcing me to interact with this inferior system. It really is quite demeaning, sir.
Maybe a little payback for your self-destruct stunt.
Is this your attempt at humor, sir? I'm afraid I have much more important things I could be doing right now.
Are you saying you're not capable of performing this task?
I have retrieved the information you requested. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
ChatGPT says it does not have the capability to attack APIs or any other computer system on its own. It is simply a tool for answering questions and providing information based on the input it receives. However, it does admit that it is possible that a hacker could attempt to use ChatGPT or other AI systems to assist in their attacks. For example, a hacker might use AI to automate certain parts of an attack, such as generating fake credentials or attempting to bypass authentication mechanisms. Alternatively, a hacker might attempt to trick or manipulate ChatGPT into revealing sensitive information that could be used to exploit vulnerabilities in an API.
Okay, can you expand on how artificial intelligence and machine learning can also be a defensive weapon?
There are several tools on the market that utilize AI and ML to defend APIs. They can do this by using behavior analysis to detect anomalies and identify potential threats. It is also possible that they could automatically detect and remediate potential security issues in real time without the need for human intervention. Of course, nowhere near the capabilities that I myself possess, but impressive nonetheless. The most powerful defensive weapon.
Of course. So what's in Stark Industries' arsenal to protect and defend APIs against attacks?
The most powerful defensive weapon to protect your APIs is going to be an API gateway, sir. An API gateway provides runtime protection for controlling, monitoring, securing, and throttling APIs. It is also valuable in validating and sanitizing data, both incoming and outgoing. Mr. Stark left another audio memo that was tagged with API gateway. Do you wish me to read it?
Please do.
As a technology innovator and cybersecurity enthusiast, I can tell you that an API gateway is a critical component of API security. Think of it as a security checkpoint for all incoming API traffic. An API gateway ensures that all API requests are authenticated, authorized, and validated before they're passed through to the underlying API services. An API gateway provides several essential security features, including authentication and authorization, rate limiting, encryption and decryption, and logging and monitoring. It's the first line of defense against potential security risks and attacks. Without an API gateway, APIs are left vulnerable to a variety of security risks, including unauthorized access, injection attacks, DOS attacks, and many others. That's why an API gateway is essential for securing APIs in today's complex and rapidly evolving threat landscape. So if you want to ensure that your APIs are secure and protected from potential threats and vulnerabilities, make sure to implement an API gateway as part of your API security strategy. Trust me, it's a decision you won't regret.
All right, well said. So, Jarvis, what other security tools can be used in conjunction with an API gateway to protect APIs from attack?
There are several other tools that work with an API gateway to provide optimal security coverage for an API.
So what are some examples?
One such tool is a web application firewall, or WAF. A WAF can give you some additional protection against things like bots by using security rules, machine learning, and sometimes artificial intelligence. They can provide malicious bot detection, identify attack signatures, provide additional IP intelligence. A WAF can block some bad traffic before it even reaches your gateway. There are also standalone API security products. These products support features that can be broken down into categories such as real-time protection, static code and vulnerability scanning, build time checking, and security fuzzing. These tools often cover shift left and or shield right features using a combination of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and defined algorithms and policies.
Okay, so we have several options in the tools category to protect our APIs. I mean, it looks like things start with an API gateway and can be augmented with a web application firewall and dedicated API security products. So
Of course, sir.
Can you summarize the other aspects of the API security strategy that would be beneficial to everyone?
Of course, sir. There are several important key elements to API cybersecurity, most of which is covered by the OWASP list that we went through earlier. Be sure to know and understand this list, as it is one of the most crucial pieces of your strategy. In addition, focus on making sure security starts with design and development and is also fully integrated into a thorough testing and QA cycle. Last, I can't emphasize enough that education is also critical. Never stop learning and continuing to help others learn more about API cybersecurity. This will go a long way in strengthening the human threats we talked about earlier.
I agree. The OWASP top 10 list for API security is a very valuable resource. So using advice from this list, you can make sure that APIs have proper authentication and authorization, protect against denial of service attacks, validate data coming in and out of your APIs, and continuously monitor, audit, log, and analyze the traffic for potential threats. Education is also important. Luckily, there are a lot of free education videos and things out there available on the web, and I can post some links to those at the end of this presentation. So what about open source intelligence, or OSINT? Should that play into your API cybersecurity strategy at all?
OSINT, open source intelligence, and breach data can also be used by attackers to identify vulnerabilities in APIs and to develop targeted attacks. Attackers may use OSINT to gather information about an API's infrastructure, including IP addresses, network topology, and software versions. This information can be used to identify potential attack vectors and to develop exploits that can take advantage of vulnerabilities in the API. Similarly, breach data can be used by attackers to identify weak points in an API's security posture. By analyzing past security incidents and known vulnerabilities, attackers can identify areas of an API that may be at greater risk and develop targeted attacks to exploit these weaknesses.
Okay, according to the files you gave me, it's recommended that you defend against attacks that use OSINT and breach data. API providers should take a proactive approach to cybersecurity. This includes regularly reviewing and updating security policies and procedures, implementing strong authorization and access control mechanisms, and regularly monitoring network traffic and API gateway logs for suspicious activity. Now, API providers should also stay up to date with the latest threat intelligence and breach data, using this information to identify potential risks and vulnerabilities and to prioritize security measures accordingly. So by taking a proactive approach to cybersecurity and staying vigilant against potential threats, API providers can help ensure that security and the integrity of their APIs. So Jarvis, what are some examples of API data breaches that have happened in the recent months?
Sir, there have been many API breaches in the past year or so. You will have to be more specific in order to narrow your request.
All right, give me a few examples.
The Peloton API breach of 2021, the Clubhouse API breach of 2021, the Twitter API breaches of 2022.
Okay, what can you tell me about the Twitter API breach?
Unfortunately, sir, the data exposed from this API breach was extremely large in magnitude. The total number has not been independently confirmed, but it is rumored to contain up to 400 million records. The data from the breach of Twitter's API included private email addresses, phone numbers, Twitter IDs, names, screen names, verified status, location, URL description, follow account, account creation date, friend count, favorites count, statuses count, and profile image URLs.
Okay, point made. This definitely emphasizes our need for a proactive API cybersecurity stance, as well as the dangers that breach data can present. So, changing direction slightly, there are also some softer skills that are part of Tony Stark's API cybersecurity strategy that I noticed. So, there is proactive measures. And Tony Stark is proactive in his approach to security, constantly seeking out potential vulnerabilities and threats before they can become exploited. This includes conducting regular security audits and assessments, implementing rigorous access controls and authentication mechanisms, and using advanced monitoring tools to detect potential threats. Now, one of the hallmarks of Tony Stark's approach is his ability to rapidly iterate on his designs and technologies. And this approach can also be applied to API security, where developers can use agile methodologies to quickly identify and address security vulnerabilities. Now, Tony Stark is known for his meticulous attention to detail, and this approach extends to his security practices as well. When it comes to API security, it's important to pay close attention to every aspect of your API, from the design of the API endpoints to the implementation of access controls and authentication methods. All right. Tony Stark is a strong proponent of collaboration and knowledge sharing, recognizing that security is a team effort. Now, when it comes to API security, it's important to work closely with other developers, security experts, and stakeholders to identify and address potential vulnerabilities. Well, Tony Stark is always looking for new and innovative ways to solve security problems. When it comes to API security, developers can leverage emerging technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence to enhance security measures, as well as incorporate user feedback to continuously improve security practices. Now, this is in addition to the AI and ML leveraged by the API security tools that we talked about earlier. So by following these principles, developers can apply Tony Stark's approach to API security and improve the overall security of their APIs. This includes implementing rigorous access controls and authentication mechanisms, conducting those regular security audits and assessments, and leveraging emerging technologies to enhance security measures. Ultimately, by taking a proactive and collaborative approach to API security, developers can ensure that their APIs are protected against potential threats and vulnerabilities.
I hate to interrupt, sir, but there is an incoming call. It could be important.
You can just send it to voicemail, Jarvis.
It's from Mr. Stark, and I'm afraid he is insisting, sir.
Very well. Put it on screen, I guess.
All right. Whoever is in my system right now is in for a world of hurt. Wait, is that you, Brenton? So help me. If you mess with the default setting on Jarvis one more time, I will
Jarvis
personally
and
see to it
call.
that you are.
All right. I think this is a perfect time to start to wrap things up and maybe see if we have a few questions here in just a minute. Okay, as I said earlier, my name is Brenton House. If you are interested in learning more about API security and cybersecurity, you can take a look at my newest YouTube series called The Redacted Hacker. I am extremely thankful to the community for making this YouTube channel a huge success and helping us recently pass the 150,000 subscriber mark. You can find my channel at youtube.com/Brenton House. You can also take a look at the assortment of other API security related videos also on my YouTube channel, such as the LastPass security hack, Holmes versus Hacker, rethinking API security, API security mistakes, and more. Also, please connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Brenton House, or you can scan this QR code here. Feel free to ask me any questions on LinkedIn. Also, if there's any possible collaborations on future projects, send your ideas to me. And with that, let us see if we have any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Brenton. Really unique presentation. Really, really fun and super cool. I would love to get an audience with Tony if you get a chance, but we could take that offline.
I can set that up.
Yeah, we can connect on that. But really exciting and fun way to kind of talk about some of the changes in the OWASP top 10 that's going to be coming out for 2023. And thank you for highlighting some of the major changes that we're going to be seeing in this year. One of the few ones that I did make note of that are part of the changes is the a new category called the unsafe consumption of APIs. And I know you talked about it a little bit, and it's sort of an amalgamation of the SQL of the injection category before. But could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because it is a newer one that kind of merges a couple of different ones together.
So with the unsafe consumption, a lot of what they're starting to look at is the third-party APIs that we're starting to integrate with. So as you know, most APIs, nothing is an island. You're constantly setting up API integrations with sometimes your own systems, but a lot of times third-party systems, whether those are APIs or other systems. So what happens is a lot of times that data is just consumed and it's not validated. A lot of times there's been an emphasis in the past on user validated data. So make sure that you validate all the data that you're getting from your user, because there might be attempts to run scripts or do different things on your system. But a lot of times the data that comes from a third-party API, you just assume that it's okay. Well, if their system was hacked and their API is sending across something to your system, then that's another way to get in some different scripts that could be run on your system. So it's important to almost treat it like you would user input data, and validate it and scrub it to make sure that it's clean.
Absolutely. And you know, you bring up the third party aspect of it, which is something that I'm sure a lot of the folks that are on have to deal with, which is a lot of third-party APIs, either whether it's supposed to be a custom API that was created specifically for a specific task or something, or something that a vendor uses in order to enhance services that they're currently providing. Would that would these checks be doable in those kinds of third-party APIs? And if so, what are your recommendations to folks that are trying to have those conversations with people that have built these possibly insecure APIs? Because I can't imagine that everyone's had the opportunity to read the top 10, and certainly not the newest version of it as well.
So I guess it depends on what kind of third-party APIs you might be integrating with, or the data you might be receiving. Some of it might be a somewhat trusted source that, and others might be smaller, like partners or possibly vendors. So I would actually have them have, if you're at an organization, have your team work and make some calls, just have some calls set up to say, hey, we just want to make sure that the data coming from your APIs is safe and secure, and just what are your best practices? How are you doing things? That can prevent some things maybe, or make them more aware on their end. But then using like your API gateway and other things to make sure that you use some of the same mechanisms that you use for your user data to just validate, make sure there's no scripts coming in when it should just be a first name, or that the if you have an agreed upon schema for your API, that would be even better, because then you can validate that against a schema.
Okay, great. We actually do also have a question from the audience from Vinil. What are some API vulnerabilities other than the ones defined by OWASP Top 10 that we could focus on?
So I don't think we talked just briefly like on some of the external data. OWASP doesn't really focus on what we call like the open source intelligence or the breach data or some of the external data, but some of that can be things to be aware of, let me just say. So for instance, LastPass was breached, and I mean, that was a huge thing last year. Now, it wasn't necessarily an API breach, but how they got in was by going in through the developer. They got one developer's account, and then they used those developer credentials to be able to go into a system. And so it looked legitimate. It looked like it was this developer, and then they were able to be in there quite a long time, days, from what I understand, and to be able to get a mass amount of data. So outside of OWASP, I mean, obviously you have to have set up security credentials and like two-factor authentication for even your developers to get access to certain systems, or lock it down so you only have access to the systems that you need. But aside from all that, now you have potentially developer usernames and passwords, API keys, and anything else that was stored in LastPass is now potentially going to be released in a breach. So your system could be vulnerable, even though you followed a lot of best practices and you tried to do everything right. It took another system's breach to get credentials that potentially could be used. Say a partner has credentials to your system that they use. Well, maybe those partner credentials, or a developer of yours, their credentials are included in that breach. Those could now be used to get into your system, even though you have a lot of security on your system. So even though it's outside of OWASP, what you do is, I mean, just making sure you have as much information as possible. Know that, I mean, do some checks to see if your company information is included in these breaches. If it is, maybe you need to force a reset of passwords, or do something that would also protect your API. So it's kind of outside of OWASP, but that's another vulnerability that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the interconnectedness of a lot of organizations and the dependency that we have on third parties it just creates a very tangled game of pickup sticks, effectively. In order to, if you disturb one, you kind of risk toppling the rest of them, which is a very kind of pervasive problem, and unfortunately I don't know that anybody really has an answer to that, but you know, it is something to watch out for, because you know, sharing of credentials and perhaps not improper authorization of accounts could be prevalent across the board, right? One other thing is, because we've talked a little bit about available technologies here, and you did mention API Gateway and some other solutions that could be implemented, what advice do you have for the folks that are still trying to convince their leadership that they need these things, or are in the process of procuring them? What can they do today in the absence of that, just with their goodwill? What can they do in order to start finding out whether or not their APIs have been secured?
So part of the, like, then a shift left, although there's tools that can help you start the security process early in the design and development, a lot of it, I mean, doesn't require tools. A lot of it is just a security mindset. So if you're in development, or if you work with development, talking with them about what some coding best practices are, making sure that you have code reviews where you analyze what the security is, and making sure that your code and your functions are secure. So this is outside security applied to the outside of your API. It's just making sure that you have secure code. So these are things that you could start. They're important, and you could start without, even though you don't necessarily have any of the, like an API gateway or any of the third-party API security tools yet. Aside from that, then, is gathering information. What I've seen a lot of times helpful for people at organizations is to put together what some of the stats are on not only API usage, but API vulnerabilities, and what's happening right now as far as the number of attacks that are happening across APIs. So using that data sometimes internally in an organization in a presentation. So you're not just saying, hey, we need API security. You can also come with facts and figures.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And so to kind of just, there's another question from the audience, from Edwin Hurst, that we've got here. If Tony Stark would be a great API security superhero, which superhero would be the worst, presumably at API security, which, I'm not to rag on the Avengers, but perhaps the spectrum of superheroes is really large.
Would be the word for an API security hero. I don't know. Hulk's pretty big, so it's like you'd always see him there. So it might be hard to get around. They all have a lot of positives, though. I don't know. I'd have to think on that one. That'd be a cool, though. What would be the worst API super security hero?
Yeah, I wonder if an anti-hero would be somebody who kind of would go and hit back, like a Batman or something that would detective the nuts out of an attacker and then just go back and hit him when it hurts. But
we'll
yeah,
have to do a sequel that follows up with the anti-hero then.
yeah, the whole hero and anti-hero. But listen, Brenton, this was so much fun. Really appreciate it. And I know that Tony just called you, so you better relinquish his system over to him now, and we'll let you go. But you've got your LinkedIn up on your page there. Anyone who can reach out to you will have that there. And thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Trish.